Welcome to AgriBusiness Global Report, a show that brings you executives interviewing executives or experts working in the agrochemical, biological, and plant health industries. In this show, Bob Trogele, Chief Operating Officer of AMVAC Corporation, interviews CS Liew, Managing Director of Pacific Agriscience. They'll discuss what companies entering the biorational space can do to be successful and give advice for CEOs when looking how to grow their business in 2024.
So good day, everyone. My name is Bob Trogele. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of AMVAC Corporation in Newport Beach, California. And I have the pleasure and the honor today of interviewing CS Liew.
Good morning or good evening, everyone. I am based in Singapore. I have a company called Pacific Agriscience that I formed about 24 years ago.
So what do you see as the top key success factors for any company entering this space or in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question too. As I said earlier, I do have a major focus in the biorational space simply because of companies not only at the top tier, but also the second tier, looking more and more into the biorational space, and also partly driven by legislations, right? Particularly in North America, Japan, and the EU, driving the major growth in the biorational space. And interestingly, Brazil too, I mentioned earlier, double-digit CAGR, in terms of biorational products, right? Brazil is amazing. The figure being thrown about is about 40-45%. Not only double-digit, but double-digit with a 4 in front, right? Overall, the world growth in terms of biorationals is about 15%, but in Brazil we're talking about 45%. So, of course, there are several factors over in Brazil that is driving that phenomenal growth over there in terms of the biorationals. But anyway, coming back to your question, I would say for any companies that are centered around the biorational space, basically biostimulants, biopesticides. Of course, there are others, such as what they call macroorganisms, the good bugs eating the bad bugs. That's also part of biosolutions.
Biofertilizers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, biofertilizers. But I would say, biostimulants, biopesticides are by far the two biggest segments within the biorational space. So I would say, first thing, data. Going back 10 years ago, this biorational space or biostimulants, biopesticides, people deem them as snake oil, right? Because the proponents, the scientists, the discoverers of products in this space tended to overclaim, this product of mine not only increases yield, but also forestall insect attacks, ease disease pressure, and blah, blah, blah. So when you start to overclaim what your products can do, it does give the image of snake oil, right? So it's not only with the farmers who are very well versed. I always tell people farmers are entrepreneurs. They know ROI. Yeah. If you get them to buy, you want them to buy your product, you better be able to demonstrate a positive ROI. Right, return on investment. Otherwise, they're not going to buy. It doesn't matter whether it's from a village in China or a village in Africa or in India. It is pretty entrepreneurial, right? So try to focus on the major functions or factors for your particular biorational product, and try not steer away from overclaiming what it can do, right? So then it gives a much better image, amongst farmers, dealers, distributors, the entire supply chain, right? So, like I say, over the last 10 years, a lot of science had gone into the biorational space. So it's no longer deemed as snake oil today. But of course, you always have some new players coming into the market, and they don't understand what I was telling earlier about snake oil. So there's still that tendency to cling on to the fact that my product can do wonders, right? Right. So the other major aspect in terms of success in the biorational space is cost effectiveness, right? There's a tendency for biorationals to be more costly for farmers to use compared to chemical pesticides, especially generics, right? Once the chemical pesticide become generic, prices go way down. So farmers tend to look at those prices and say, wow, I love to use more biosolutions, but they're just too costly. So for anyone to succeed, you do have to look into this cost effectiveness aspect as well, right? Then one more thing that I should say is that performance of the products give that a major focus as well. Okay, because some of these biorationals are derived from microorganisms, some are derived from the metabolites of these microorganisms. So, microorganisms are living things, they can mutate. So if you are pulling out some metabolites out of bacteria, for instance, that may have a biofungicide usage or bioherbicide or bioinsecticide function, you got to make them sure that they don't mutate, right? And cause yield of these metabolites to go down, right? So that's one aspect. And then you look at the plant extracts. Again, a plant is a living thing. So under different environmental conditions, they can produce more of the substance that you want as a bio herbicide or bioinsecticide or biofungicide product. And then under certain circumstances, the yield of that substance may also go down or go up, depending on the growth environment that they are subjected to. So obviously, if you can isolate and say that this A molecule is the molecule in the extract that is giving the results, then you can control the efficacy and performance better compared to, let's say, a composite of thousands of molecules in an extract. You just take neem oil as an example. I mean, there are thousands of molecules there. But, over the years, as the directin has been isolated as the key ingredient that is bringing the insecticidal activity. So if you get down to that level, then it doesn't matter which year you produce the neem oil because you are extracting the directin, right? So I'm just using that as an example.
That's a great example.
You need to have a focus on performance and consistency in the performance, right?
Well, I would certainly think our viewers today listening to this interview will probably cherish that advice and that focus as far as the key success factors. I would fully agree with you. There are many more, of course, but I think those are certainly top three that come to mind. So let me ask you one more question. So, in my opinion, your professional track record is best in class and almost next to none in this industry.
Thank you.
So if you had to make some recommendations to CEOs and executive teams for the next 5 years in regarding to investing in the agribusiness space and how they would resource that, how would you go about that? What advice would you give to CEOs in that regard?
Right. That's another pretty good question because we're talking about M&As, investments, which is really my focus in my current business. I would say, earlier we talked about food security, we talked about geopolitical rivalries, we talked about war causing upsurge in prices, spikes in prices of both ag inputs as well as food. I would say maybe look at what Bill Gates is doing in terms of acquiring prime farmland, right? So, although he said, "Well, there's no major agenda behind this other than trying to make the farmland that I acquired more productive," I think that's a little bit more than that. Not only Bill Gates, but the Simplot family, for instance, the founder of Amazon, for instance, they're accumulating like 300,000 or 400,000 acres of prime farmland, right? So I would say, yeah, that is certainly one area of focus, in terms of investment, right? But not everybody can buy farmland, especially across cross-border purchases. You get a backlash from the countries in which you try to acquire too much farmland. It's pretty sensitive, like China a few years ago had already been beaten back because they were starting to buy farmland in Australia, in a smaller way in New Zealand. And then you have the Arabs, buying over in Africa. You have a lot of those sort of activities. But like I said, cross-border purchases of farmland, it's pretty sensitive, politically sensitive, so may not be a good thing to do. But within your own country, certainly you can do that, right? But then again, some food deficit countries, like the Middle East, even in Singapore, where I am, we import food from around the world, right? We don't have the land to grow. So if we want to do any farming, we're going to go outside to acquire farms. So if you cannot do that, then the next best thing is contract farming, right? I have, in fact, even written an article on that, on food security in Singapore and with regions similar to Singapore, where we don't have a lot of farmland. So I highly recommend contract farming. Go to friendly countries, such as for the case of Singapore, we would definitely want to go to Australia and New Zealand because we have very good relationships with these two countries, right? So you go do contract farming, you go there to buy farmland, but you also have to be sure that you can take the food out. What's the harvest is there. So unless you also do a layer of agreement with the governments to say that under any circumstances, I can take part of the production out of your country to send it back to my country, right? So you got to have 2 layers of agreement with the contract farmer and a government-to-government type agreement that is important. But of course, selecting very friendly countries would be a good start, right? So yeah, but then with contract farming, you also have to be careful of leakages, right? With the farm. So you got to have people on the ground to supervise, to monitor, so that farmers, stay honest, right? Yeah. So not all farmers are honest, unfortunately. Yep. Yeah. So another area that I would advise CEOs in terms of investments would be the startups that we talked about, in the biorational space. There are lots of them, as you say. Some are under distress, because they haven't got good funding, so they'll run out of cash and they cannot go forward. There could be some good technologies out there, right? So keep a lookout for those, right? In all the technologies that I often bring up, not only the biorationals, but even post-harvest, right? Technologies and products, right? Especially in the your first question where you asked me what regions, what technologies you want to invest in. Yeah. So in Africa, in Asia, many parts of Asia, and even LATAM, post-harvest technologies are still quite far behind compared to the developed parts of the world. So there's a lot of room there for investments as well. And of course, gene editing, I should also add, right? Because going forward, we no longer want to talk about genetic modification, which could take 12, 15 years to come up with one trade, and 140 or 150 million US dollars to come up with just one trade. But with gene editing, not only that you speed up the process, it's down to something like 5 years to develop a trait. It takes only 4 or 5 million US dollars. So that's another area of focus, right? And then the good thing about this is also from the regulatory standpoint, it's not looked upon as harshly as genetic modification, right? When it comes to gene editing. Although having said that, the EU doesn't look at it that way. They're going to regulate everything, including gene editing, right? So, yeah. So going forward, I would, advise the CEOs to look into these areas. But if we are talking about CEOs who are not in the ag game, but more, the fund managers, the private equity funds, if you look at the CEOs in that space, and they want to pay attention to what you and I discussed today in terms of where the money should be invested, and if they are attracted to agribusiness, I would say try to co-invest, right, with people from the industry, because they are from outside. They're not experts in agriculture. They're not well-versed in the ag space, in the food production space. So they will want to co-invest rather than just go it alone, right? Now, in terms of where to resource these investments, I would say if you are in the ag space, you are one of the ABCDs. Earlier we had BRICS, now I'm talking about ABCD. The big 4 food trading companies of the world: A for Archer Daniels Midland, B for Bunge, C for Cargill, D for Dreyfus. The 4 of them, they trade in 80% of the world's food grain, especially.
Whoa.
Right? So they are also looking at backward integration, forward integration. So, for those, I would say, yes, they have a lot of cash, right, to invest. But for some others, they may not have as much cash to invest. So I would say they will have to resource outside of their own coffers. So maybe co-invest, right? Maybe bring in some of these private equity guys. They may take a stake in your company. And then with the funds coming in, you can then invest in some of those areas that I talked about. But one final thing I want to say is that try not to borrow too much money to invest, because especially if you're borrowing from banks, right? Interest rates, as you said, can go up, can have a spike, and therefore that can cause a lot of damage to your strategy. And also being, let's say, a founder of a company, the more you start to get money from outside, the more you have to dilute your own shareholdings, and one day you may become a really minority shareholder, and you can lose control of the company, right? So resourcing capital and to invest, you got to consider all these aspects.
Yes, I could listen to you for hours. On your last point, I would agree. Cash is king right now, and you don't want to over leverage your balance sheet in these days. But interesting advice for the listeners. And I want to thank you really for sharing your thoughts so openly with me and with the audience. So CS, I really appreciate you taking the time today from Singapore here to Newport Beach.